As always, sorry about any background noises, we're just going to plow through. Part 5. Chapter 14. Source. How to find a Jedi who didn't want to be found. Most people in the Senate building, of course, would dismiss the idea of the Jedi Order maintaining a presence there out of hand. Bail knew better than that, though. Obi-Wan would never come right out and tell his commander-in-chief that there were others working within the senatorial halls, but he'd play coy enough that Bail was sure there had to be at least one more keeping an eye on things. So, he had his certainty, but what he didn't have was time, resources, or knowledge to sift through the records of every single person currently active in the Senate Dome and try to determine which one was the secret wizard with a laser sword. Chancellor took a slug of his whiskey. Fine, draw them out, he thought to himself. How hard could that be? He couldn't very well put an ad in the personals or in the hallway on the bulletin board. Wanted, secret members of a hidden sect for rescue mission. Meet at the office of the Chancellor at midnight. If he knew any other politicians whom he could trust, and who might have contacts within the Order, that would be helpful, but he wasn't confident that the latter existed, and he was damned sure the former were about to become drastically fewer in number. Nor could he afford to go chasing after rumors and urban legends about pockets of Jedi elsewhere on the planet. Such reports were about as likely to be accurate as records of angel sightings. Blowing out a frustrated breath, Bail refilled his glass. At least he was fortunate enough to be on Coruscant, where much of the informed population actually did believe the Order existed. Were he the governor of some backwater out in the Outer Rim, needing assistance, he would have no guarantee that such beings even walked the galaxy. Fine, he can't go to the Jedi. Can he get them to come to him? Bleary-eyed, he simply stared out the window for a while, watching the needlepoint glow of speeder lanes drifting past. He supposed it probably wasn't productive to think himself in circles like this, but he couldn't go to sleep, getting nothing done. Every hour meant increasing peril for Obi-Wan, wherever he was. Problem was, short of staging a terrorist attack, what was he going to do? How do you draw him out? It couldn't possibly be as simple as telling them, Obi-Wan Kenobi's in trouble. Send help. Well, hold on. Could it? The Chancellor directed his attention away from the window, down to the comms unit on his desk. It was completely secure, able to contact anyone anywhere on the planet, or in orbit, anywhere, across the stretch of the galaxy, really. And just to be sure, he'd had his private security team from Alderaanian Space Forces take a look at it, in addition to federal security forces, and everyone said, completely clean. He tapped a knuckle against the polished stone of the desk and considered. If he followed through on the plan that had just popped into his head, the consequences in the Senate would be disastrous. Absolutely no question about that. He was already facing dubious odds of getting through this with his reputation intact, odds that would be whittled away to almost nothing regardless of whether this ploy worked or not. And Mon Mothma would kill him. Her support of him was already a potential albatross on her neck, one that this would turn into a potential millstone. And it's not remotely guaranteed to work, by the way. Odds are it won't. Could he really risk throwing everything he and Bria had suffered over the last several years that the Coalition had worked for, grinding through month after month of gridlock? More importantly, could he risk the Republic itself? His speech to the Defense Committee had been an attempt to save his neck, but it also hadn't been bluster. The Confederacy had been chewing its way through the Outer Rim for months. None of the senators had seen war in their lifetimes, nor had their predecessors, or their predecessors. Bail wasn't any more prepared for it than they were, but at least he saw the signs that it was coming. If people like Palpatine and Bel Iblis got their way, the Republic would isolate itself into an early grave. Obi-Wan had agreed with him. That's why he'd gone on the mission. And preserving his chancellorship might be the only way to honor his friend's final known wishes. Bale looked at the blinking red light. Moved his gaze around the room. Paintings, carpet, furniture. I have to look out the window, distant apartment lights twinkling. Finally, he raised his glass in a toast to the empty air. General Kenobi. The day being your friend means being a lesser chancellor is the day I leave the Senate. The whiskey went down in one go. Before he could lose his nerve, he punched a number into the comm and leaned back in his chair. A few moments later, a voice crackled on the other end. Chancellor Organa? Sinan. Good evening.
Good evening, Chancellor. Rather late, isn't it?
Listen, Bale said grimly, leaning closer to the mic. You did not hear this from me. Section. Ooh, I've played it wrong. Republic Archives. The HoloNet. The HoloNet is a free and open communications network maintained but not controlled by the Galactic Republic. Republic member systems, independent worlds, and outlaw ship crews alike all make use of this method of near-instantaneous intergalactic communication. All civilized planets and star systems contain HoloNet nodes, which send packets of data into space. For deep space operation away from settled worlds, most starships and starfighters are also outfitted with HoloNet nodes. When a message is ready to be sent across the HoloNet, a node will bounce the data to a port. This port tight beams the data to hyperspace, where it can be received by any number of other HoloNet ports across the galaxy, before being delivered to the HoloNet node nearest to its intended recipient. Across the galaxy, this process occurs hundreds of millions of times per second, whether for the purpose of sending point-to-point messages or looking up information stored in one of the Republic's digital libraries, such as this one. The decentralized mesh network of HoloNet nodes and ports is nearly impossible to hack, infiltrate, or bring down. Communications disruption is still possible, and involves flooding a system's nodes with junk data, so calls and communications can't get through. To avoid falling victim to this in a time of war, the Republic Defense Force maintains a secondary, priority network of nodes and ports only accessible with special equipment. Chapter 15. Flow. Jedi, pilot, and grifter stood huddled back to back in the center of the cavern. Obi-Wan held his lightsaber at the ready, its blade bathing the trio in a soft blue glow. Padme held her blaster pistol in both hands. Anakin gripped his improvised flashlight tightly. The Jedi silently hoped the scrapper wouldn't find himself needing to use that as a weapon. Run. That had been fairly useless. Cave crawlers, it turns out, can catch up to people. As the group had fled, Padme dispatched the closest one with a clean headshot. Nice. That had brought them time, but running wasn't going to work forever. Which is why, in unspoken agreement, they'd just skidded to a stop midway through this cavern. You two go on ahead, Obi-Wan whispered. I'll catch up once I've dealt with these things. He slowly moved his lightsaber back and forth, casting its blue light across the cave. Okay. No, wait, hold on. If it's all the same to you, I'm going to stay with the guy with the laser sword, Anakin replied, shivering as the chitters of the cave crawlers echoed in the distance. Fighting them is pointless. The noise will just keep drawing him more. We have to find a place to hide. She adjusted the knapsack that was slung over her shoulder. The one thing she had managed to grab when they fled the broken swoop bike. If they did get to safety, Obi-Wan supposed. Okay, at least they'd have supplies. Cool. Do you see a place to hide, dear? Anakin asked, annoyance seeping into his voice. There were no nooks or crannies anywhere. The walls moved in smooth ripples. Stalactites hung above like stone daggers, feeling more oppressive now, actually, than they had all day. The river that ran down one side of the cavern wasn't even ankle deep. Hiding beneath its surface would not be an option. And the next batch of cave crawlers had just rounded the corner. Anakin aimed his flashlight at him. The lead crawler's cluster of milky white eyes didn't react to the light. The group's antennae swayed like reeds in a breeze, chittering, echoing through the cavern as their mandibles clicked together. Obi-Wan glanced sideways at his two companions and motioned for them to back up. When they'd retreated far enough, the general flourished his lightsaber, twirling the hilt in his hand. Vroom, vroom, vroom. As the hum of the blade sweeping through the air resonated off the walls, the antennae of the crawlers straightened up. The four creatures clacked their mandibles, agitated, and began to scuttle toward the source of the noise. Obi-Wan turned and nodded at Padme. The woman leveled her blaster pistol at the creature in front. The first went wide, grazed the leg of a different one, but the second one landed dead center target's eyes. It collapsed on the cave floor. As Padme fired off another pair of blaster shots, Obi-Wan stretched his left hand outward toward the cave ceiling, rather past the point of keeping further secrets. He made a fist, clenched it tight, and twisted. The sound of crumbling rock resonated throughout the passage. A stalactite broke free of the cave ceiling and fell toward the nearest crawler, impaling the creature's abdomen and pinning it to the cave floor. Padme spun to face the writhing creature and shot it in the head. Obi-Wan took a step forward and hurled his lightsaber at one of the crawlers. The blade impacted the insectoid's head and stuck in it, silver handle gleaming as the creature thrashed about. Even as the blade connected, its owner was moving again, closing the distance between him and the target. And as the crawler fell, spasming to the cave floor, Obi-Wan extracted the lightsaber, swept it behind him as he pulled it free. The haphazard flail managed to connect with the antennae of a third crawler, slicing them clean off. That unfortunate creature clicked its mandibles together and flailed its head about, and then skidded away from Obi-Wan and ran into a wall. Anakin let out an amused snort as the creature wandered aimlessly, its interest in dinner suddenly lost. See? Follow the guy with the laser sword. Okay, what's the matter? Can't find us? Padme taunted, approaching the confused crawler. She angled her pistol down at the creature's head. The crippled insect went limp. Smoke rose from the hole in its exoskeleton. Obi-Wan wiped a sleeve across his face. You're a little frightening. Did anyone ever tell you that? Padme grinned humorlessly. I'll take that as a compliment. The general decided to count that as progress. Well, Anakin said, hefting his flashlight, as fun as it is to stand and watch you guys fight these things, we should get moving. There's probably more coming up behind us. On cue, more chittering emerged from the rear. God, however many they'd killed, evidently wasn't enough. Obi-Wan snapped his lightsaber blade off, clipped the blade to his belt, and lauded at the pilot. Lead the way. Anakin nodded and swept the light back into the forward position. The compensators in his mechanical arm allowed him to keep the flashlight held steady. Were he holding it with his other hand, it would have likely been flailing about and making the light it cast kind of useless. As it was, the beam stayed locked in place and perfectly illuminated the passage ahead that stretched downward at a gentle slope, and providing Obi-Wan a perfect glimpse of yet another set of cave crawlers approaching from the front. Oh, Anakin spoke through clenched teeth. God, you've got to be kidding me. Behind them, the distantly chittering crawlers pulled into view. 3, at least, agitated. We're boxed in. Oh, is that your professional tactical analysis? Padme sneered. Come on, people, we need ideas. What? What? Anyone? The Jedi called on the Force, on his own intuition, on anything. But the louder the clacking of the mandibles rang off the stone walls, the harder it was to think. All his mind could fix on was a future full of ripping and tearing. God. He hangled his lightsaber and ground a foot into the cave floor. Well, at least this time I won't be dying alone. River. Obi-Wan whipped his head in the direction the word had come from. What? River, Anakin muttered again, his voice almost buried by the shrieking insectoids on either side of them. River. His eyes shot upward as he said it again, loud enough now to be heard over the cacophony. River! Without waiting for a reaction, the pilot bolted to his right and jumped into the small river alongside the cave floor. So what? Padme and Obi-Wan watched him slide along the slick riverbed, past the crawlers, into the shadows of the cave. The pair's eyes met, united for a moment in their mingled annoyance and incredulity. This guy. Then the nearest crawler snapped its mandibles, and the trance broke. Padme dove into the riverbed, followed closely by Obi-Wan. Drowning, he supposed, would be a nice change from being, incinerated. The surface of the riverbed was smooth, covered in oily moss, which made for an effective sliding surface. The Jedi felt himself start effortlessly gliding along the waterway, and had to throw his hands up to protect his eyes from the sudden spray of liquid he was kicking up. An attempt at throwing his weight to one side to steer himself worked better than he intended. His ribs shrieked in protest as he careened into the cavern wall with a thud. This impact wasn't enough to stop him from moving, though. Whoa! And in fact, he noted in between coughing up water, he was picking up speed. The river was sloping downward faster than he'd expected, diverting away from the cavern that they'd been walking through. His two companions, were nowhere in sight, though he most certainly wasn't about to raise his head for a better look. Water slides. Fun! Somewhere in front of him, there was a startled yell, then another. Oh, God. The Jedi braced for whatever had elicited the noise. His stomach lurched as the riverbed dropped steeply and banked hard to the right. Strange light up ahead. A cool blue glow. Obi-Wan's heart leapt into his throat as he shot out of the river and entered free fall. His water slide had become a small waterfall. Momentum carried him through the air before he plummeted down, splashing into a puddle just a few inches deep. Okay. Oh. He managed. Oh. Clutching at his chest, which now definitely felt like it was broken. He hauled himself up out of the water and surveyed his surroundings. Great. The cool blue light, it turned out, was coming from more of that glowing lichen he had encountered on his way to the market. It snaked up the walls and across the ceiling, splitting off into smaller tendrils like the branches of a tree. The room the fungus illuminated here was big, roughly circular, and the waterfall behind him seemed mostly to disappear into the ground. The only remnant of that river was this puddle. An inappropriately gleeful Anakin Skywalker was standing at the edge of the puddle, dripping wet and wearing an idiot grin on his face. Padme, who seemed to have lost her cape somewhere, stood up, walked over to her husband, and punched him in the shoulder. Nice plan! It worked, didn't it? Obi-Wan unclipped his lightsaber from his belt and raised a finger, pointing it up to where they had entered this new room. Not exactly. A single cave crawler stood up at the top of the waterfall, its mandibles clacking and antennae whirring. Anakin began moving slowly. Huh? What? Not away from the crawler. Toward it. And toward a cave wall covered in glowing lichen. Each step was deliberate, placed carefully on the cave floor in an effort to remain silent. This silence was thwarted when he reached his mechanical arm toward the glowing life form. Anakin, don't, whispered Obi-Wan. The crawler screeched. Evidently it heard something. But it did not move from its perch at the top of the waterfall. Anakin's robotic fists clamped around a chunk of lichen, tore it from the wall, and compressed it into something resembling a ball. He wound the arm up and hurled the glowing bundle at the cave crawler. The lichen brushed one of the creature's legs, eliciting a piercing shriek. Obi-Wan dropped his lightsaber hilt, hastily raising his hands to cover his ears. The cave crawler backed away with some difficulty, its legs twitching uncontrollably. The clacking grew fainter and fainter, finally vanishing entirely beneath the rush of the water. Well, here we are. Anakin exhaled deeply. Obi-Wan uncovered his ears and bent down to pick up his lightsaber. I don't understand. How did you do that? He asked the scrapper, clipping his saber to his belt. That stuff doesn't work through droid arms. Crawlers don't seem to like it, though. So it would seem. The Jedi stared at the lichen-covered wall, picturing what kind of creatures the fungus might have been warding off in the tunnel he'd first traversed after the crash. Okay. Wincing, he turned to address Padme. What exactly is the... His question stopped short when he realized the woman was pointing her blaster at his face. Okay, Kenobi, she said, leveling an icy stare at him. We need to talk. Section. Anakin, still a little shaky from recent events, took a moment to realize what exactly was going on. Obi-Wan had his dripping hands now raised above his head, with an "oh, what now" expression in his eyes. Padme had their blaster trained on him, gripping it steadily with both hands. Hang on. Padme, what are you doing? She kept her gun trained on Obi-Wan. He's done nothing but keep secrets from us. He lied about his name. He tried to hide his job. And then he pulled out a damn lightsaber. Her eyes flickered from her husband and back to the stranger. No more secrets, Jedi. She spat out the last word of her mouth as if it were venomous. Obi-Wan kept his hands high in surrender. No more secrets. What do you want to know? Not yet. Anakin, get his lightsaber. He considered protesting. Okay. But arguing with her probably wasn't the best way to get her out of this mood. And so, doing his best to communicate to Kenobi with his eyes just how sorry he was about this blip in their relationship, Anakin reached down and plucked the metal cylinder from the Jedi's belt. He turned it over in his flesh hand, seized with an irrational sort of delight. His thumb brushed the activation switch, and he resisted the very overwhelming desire to activate it and wave it around. Now then, Padme said, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Why are you here? The Jedi threw a rueful look at his property in Anakin's hand, but responded calmly. I'm on a mission for the Republic. The Confederacy is trying to capture Had Abaddon, and I was sent to stop them. That much I'm sure you've gathered. Anakin, where's the rest of your team? There's no one else. I was sent alone. You were sent down here to repel the Confederate assault by yourself. I'm sorry. I don't buy it. Come on. Not down here, no. I was never supposed to land. I should have put a stop to it in orbit, but I failed. Crashed one of their ships. There were complications that led to it breaking through the crust. So the thing about Alderaan was a lie too, then, huh? He shook his head for a second, then reconsidered. Half. I am from there, but I wouldn't know the mathematics needed to calculate turbo laser power if they bit me. What does the Confederacy want with Had Abaddon? Anakin asked. Is there something to like about we didn't come here by choice. Obi-Wan began to pace. If he'd hoped that Padme would allow him to walk out of the line of fire or something, it didn't work. She tracked him as he stepped back and forth, keeping him in her sights. He sighed, paced anyway, and began to answer. The healing fluid from the underground springs, we assume. We've no way of confirming it, as we haven't managed to take any of their personnel alive. The fluid's no Bacta, but it's better than nothing. Right now, If they tried an assault on a Republic world, they'd burn through troops faster than they could grow and train them. But the healing fluid rather tips things back in their favor. Wait. Padme lowered her gun to the ground. You say they grow troops? The rumors are true, Anakin said, his eyes widening in shock. Clones? It had passed around the evening campfires, yeah. But so had everything else. So had any number of outlandish tales as to what was going on. Obi-Wan nodded solemnly and ceased his movement. The same handful of people created thousands and thousands of times over. Humans, mostly. A few aliens to fill out specialized roles. We don't know where they're coming from. Not yet. So you're special forces. Padme cut in. Right? I can't see why else they would send you to handle this alone. The Jedi shook his head and slowly reached into a pocket on his uniform. He extracted a small rectangle of metal and held it up in the air, presenting it as one might present ID to a nightclub bouncer. Anakin saw the number of squares etched into it and let out a low whistle. That's pretty high, I take it. Well, look at you, said Padme. She was either impressed or mocking. Anakin thought the latter. He wasn't sure. A general, yeah. And a Jedi, she glanced at her husband. What an interesting passenger we've dragged along with us today, dear. I'd say his fare just went up again. Obi-Wan sighed. Drive the price up as much as you'd like. It doesn't change what I need to do. It is critical that the Confederacy be stopped here. Surely we can agree on that much. I must contact the Republic. Why is a Jedi in the Republic Defense Force? Padme continued, ignoring Obi-Wan's whole thing. Do your fellow soldiers know that you're a... What? I'm not an expert on the Jedi Order. I didn't think you existed. But what I gather is that it's very hush-hush. You can't be telling them... Padme? Go easy on him, okay? Anakin said, throwing the general a sympathetic look. There's no way we would have made it past those crawlers without him. He found himself on the receiving end of one of her, do you really want to argue about this? glares. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't be in this mess. Don't blame him, come on. I'm the one that picked the mark for the job. This is on me. Obi-Wan saved our lives. We should at least get him off the planet like we said we would. Padme moved her glare from him to the Jedi, whose hands were once again up in the air. Motherfucking son of a fucking asshole. Finally, she holstered her blaster. Anakin tossed the saber back to its owner, who caught it smoothly. We agreed to transport a stranger in a bar. Not a general of the Republic, and certainly not a Jedi Knight. Her husband sighed. Yeah, she had a point, as usual. Besides, the Confederacy is still in orbit. We're still going to get shot out of the sky if we try to leave. Anakin, this isn't our fight, okay? Let's take him back to the refugee camp. After that, he's on his own. She let her knapsack fall off her shoulders and hit the cave floor. Kneeling down, she opened it and began to extract supplies. We're staying here tonight. It's getting late. She tossed a small pouch at Anakin, who snatched it out of the air with his robotic hand. The scrapper pulled a small tab on the pouch, and it expanded into a square pillow. He tossed it onto the tarp that his wife had now unfolded on the cave floor. Obi-Wan walked over to the couple and sat down on the tarp, watching as Padme extracted another pillow and a small round can from the knapsack. She held up the inflatable pillow. Sorry, Kenobi, we only packed 2. I'll be fine. Padme shrugged and turned her attention to the tiny can. She placed it gingerly in the center of the tarp, then unhooked a small knife from her belt. I'll just bet that this doesn't work. She flicked the blade open and held the knife aloft, then stabbed it into the can lid. There was a hissing sound as gas escaped the can, and then a small fire crackled to life above it. Some pleasantly surprised cheer flooded into her eyes. Should burn like that all night, she said, aloud to no one in particular, moving away to inflate her own pillow. Anakin looked down at Kenobi. He'd already fallen asleep, on the tarp, using the tattered, wet remains of his cloak as a pillow. I still can't believe he bothered to grab that thing before we ran, he thought to himself. He looked back over to Padme and saw she, too, was looking now at the exhausting, bedraggled, loud-bearded man. Her face somewhat more tender than it would be were he awake to see this. Damn. He must be tired. He's had a long day. You'd be tired, too, if you started the day by crash-landing a... You'd be tired, too, if you started the day by crash-landing a ship. Hell, he was actually more worn out than he had ever been right at this second, and all he had done today was nearly die on a swoop bike, which wasn't out of the ordinary. The scrapper tossed his self-inflating pillow on the tarp next to his wife's, and then sat down next to her and removed his jacket. Shaking the dust off, he gently placed it across her body like a blanket. Lying down beside her, he draped his flesh arm over her and willed himself to relax. They were safe. For now. He closed his eyes to shut out the blue glow coming from the cave walls and allowed himself to bask in the warmth of the campfire. Section.
Republic Archives. Gecker Outfitters Survivalist Campsite Supply Kit. Mark 25.8. See in a circle. The Gecker Outfitters Survivalist fucking thing, more commonly referred to as the Go Bag, is a popular product among spacers, traders, and explorers. The kit is based off the Republic Defense Force Emergency Shelter Pack, and is intended as a compact and lightweight solution for camping and survival on a variety of habitable worlds. The kit includes self-inflating pillows, reflective blankets, compact bedrolls, and a collapsible tent for the purpose of constructing a campsite. There are also ration bars, powdered drinks, and energy paste. The kit's most famous component is the patented canned fire, a disc-shaped can that creates a campfire when punctured. The kit is sold in a sealed, compressed package, intended only to be opened when all of its components are needed. However, on less settled worlds, it's common for merchants to open the kits and sell items individually at a markup. Gecker Outfitters condemns this practice, but outside of Republic space, there is little they can do to enforce their wishes. Piecemeal go-bags are a common sight in the Outer Rim, and it's not unusual to find a single self-inflating pillow or a lone canned fire rolling loosely at the bottom of any smuggler's knapsack.
Whatever. Chapter 16. Stalled. Fucking Valis felt Maul before she saw him. As the bridge doors slid open, a faint prickling always went down her neck, as though something had charged the air. She turned from the viewport and saw the warlord striding down the catwalk, cloak flapping behind him. Every other individual present was now suddenly very intent on their console. She restrained herself from shouting at him to leave. "Lord Maul! Something that requires my attention?" When your attention is required, you will know it," he said, and started pacing in the other direction. And back. And forward. The Admiral ground her teeth together. This is punishment, she supposed, for daring to... Okay, well, maybe. When he next looped around in her direction, Valis cleared her throat. Lord Maul, a word? Outside? His eyes flashed contempt. Wordless, he continued to pace. She'd had enough. Helmsman! Said helmsman, a young woman, responded satisfyingly quickly. Yes, Admiral. I do believe it's been a while since we tested the emergency blast shields over the viewport. Please commence. Aye, sir. The helmsman pressed a few buttons, and slate-gray metal began to lower across the transparent steel. Valis fixed a smile on her face, and turned back to face the Zabrak. It was a bit disconcerting to find him 6 inches in front of her face. Ignoring the cracked amber fury of his eyes, the Admiral continued to smile. I do hope you didn't come all the way up here for the view. Outside! As soon as the blast doors had whisked shut behind them, Valis was already talking. The Zabrak would not get the first word this time. You just had a window taken from you. I had actionable intel scrubbed. If this is your idea of... Why are you still here? For once, she noted, the warlord looked taken aback. What? You don't believe Kenobi is dead. And it's not like you have anything better to do than intimidate a ship that's already scared of you. So why are you here? Why aren't you on your way to the HAD system? Maul's brow ridges lowered. Kenobi is dead. Spare me. I may not be able to use the Force, but I can read a report, even one that wasn't intended to hit my desk. For about 10 seconds, there was no reply. Abruptly, the warlord turned and punched at the turbolift button. The doors parted. Pfft, come! Of all the places Valis had expected the confrontation to go, the lift was not one of them. But she could hardly afford to look surprised now, so... As she entered, Maul tapped his cylinder to the lift wall. The report tells you that he is alive. How? Because of how ships... A capital ship doesn't make an uncontrolled descent through the atmosphere and land without breaking up. Even one that's trailing hypermatter. Someone piloted. If Kenobi was able to land half a cruiser with no engines, which he did, he was able to survive the crash. Jedi don't die easily. Depends on who's trying to kill them. Yeah. The lift began to descend. Valis sneered. My point exactly. You're the only one qualified to dispatch him speedily, so why are you here? Something in the Zabrak's face caught her eye just then. He looked frustrated, but it wasn't directed at her. And it wasn't his usual hunger. He doesn't want to be here. He wants to go. Maul? Giving his head a small shake, the warlord seemed to dispel some of the haze of impatience that was hanging over him. What you think is what you think. Speak to no one else about it. Is that an order? If you like. Leave. The turbolift's doors opened onto the restricted deck. And as suddenly as it had begun, the conversation ceased, with half of it stalking back towards its quarters. Section. Frustration. Warring with curiosity. What the hell was Maul playing at? Whatever it wasn't cowardice. Valis had concrete evidence to the contrary. It was how she'd come to be recruited. She remembered the meeting. A mysterious client. Yay. Willing to pay her an unspecified, but large amount of money in exchange for a career shift. He'd come to her ship alone. No starcraft, no bodyguards. And he'd hurled 2 of her men up against a wall when they tried to search him. Marched to the conference room, where she waited, and before she could raise a blaster, he dumped a clattering pile of metal tubes on the table. What Valis saw froze her to the spot. The Zabrak had tossed 5 lightsabers onto her table like they were silverware. Each was unique. One wrapped in leather. One with a long scratch running down the hilt. One designed to be held in one hand. And so on down the line. Their bearer had said nothing. Valis opened her mouth. Where did you get...
I killed Jedi. I am going to turn the Republic to ashes and grind the Order beneath my feet. You are going to help me.
The hand he'd raised turned to reveal a miniature holoproj. Out had sprung a rotating facsimile of the Charybdis.
And this will be yours.
It had been the only thing on his mind. When she named a price, he agreed without hesitation. When she demanded a hefty signing bonus, he agreed without hesitation. And my crew?
Do you trust them?
No.
Then once you leave with me, we will destroy this ship.
As simple as that. Okay. She'd already made up her mind, but she couldn't let that be the end of it. Why me?
You are very highly skilled.
Lots of people are highly skilled. Why a mercenary to lead a battle fleet? Surely you should be able to find military personnel with a grudge against the Republic. Maul had leaned closer.
Defectors are weak. You are not. You have hate.
Her face growing colder, she kept her voice calm. And what do you know about hatred for the Republic?
I know about hatred of Jedi.
He crossed his arms.
Do we have an agreement?
She asked the final question. Okay. How do I know you can do what you've promised? 5 minutes later, as Valis watched from a shuttle window, a cruiser had emerged from hyperspace and blown her old ship to hell. Section. It had to be that shadowy figure.
That menace. That
figure whose existence she'd suspected. The hand that held Maul's leash. Nothing else could have kept him here. Asking the warlord would be out of the question. It would be useless at best, and taken as unacceptable insolence at worst, and Valis doubted that any of the officers on the ship knew any more than she did. As far as she was aware, she was the only person in the fleet who'd been recruited personally. She turned to Melko. Hey, dipshit, sorry. Remind me, executive officer, who came to you about this little venture? Her subordinate kept on looking at his console as he answered. I can't say that I know, Admiral. I received an encrypted transmission with an order of defection. I accepted. Fascinating reading material, eh? Flushing red, he looked up from his console. Why do you ask? Just collating data, Melko, as they say. She pondered for a moment. Don't suppose there'd be a record of that sort of thing? Records. On a military ship, whatever gave you that idea? Valis examined the view from the window, now fully restored from the blast shield test. Melko, have you ever heard of the Aeonia Massacre?
Yeah.
Entire Republic outpost torn apart by some sort of creature that criminals released inside? Savages? Okay. When you get a moment, consult your records and let me know who claimed responsibility for the Aeonia Massacre. He poked at his console for a few moments, but then his fingers fell silent. The Admiral looked back to see her XO staring at her with something approaching horror. She allowed herself a smile. You have the con, Melko. Thanks for the help. Section.
Republic Archives. Ablative armor. Ablative plating is an inexpensive material used as armor against blaster fire. It consists of a microscopic latticework of energy-dissipating synthetic fibers laid against a heat-resistant plate. When struck by blaster fire, the latticework melts away, preventing whatever is armored from taking the brunt of the shot. Ablative armor is not reusable, and must be replaced or restored after it has taken too many hits. Ablative armor was initially intended for use by Republic infantry troops as a cost-saving measure to replace personal deflector shields. However, the weight of the armor combined with the potential cost of restoring it between every military skirmish saw the project sidelined. Ablative plating instead found a new life in the starship manufacturing industry. Ship deflector shield generators are heavy, expensive, and draw massive amounts of energy. For starships unlikely to see combat, ablative plating is a far more sensible defense option. It draws no power and requires only maintenance if it's actually hit by blaster fire. Most civilian vessels, and even some military shuttles, are equipped with ablative armor.
Chapter 17. Unmapped. Okay, Obi-Wan Kenobi woke from troubled dreams. Wincing as his vision adjusted to the strange blue light in the cavern, he was unsure how long he'd slept. But judging by the noises of activity around him, his traveling companions had been up for a while. "Afternoon, Kenobi," Padme said. She was deflating her pillow and packing up the campfire. "Afternoon," he said, still groggy. He moved his toes and grimaced. Oh, water was still in his boots. "I let you sleep in. I figured you need it," said Anakin. He was leaning against a lichen-free piece of cavern wall, speaking between bites of a ration bar. As he tore off another chunk with his teeth, he tossed a wrapped bar to Obi-Wan. "Don't worry, you haven't missed much, though. No point trying to figure out where we are in a cave. All we have is a very outdated map." "We have a map?" Obi-Wan asked. "Why didn't we use it earlier?" "We were a little busy," Padme said. "Besides, it's on paper. It's useless in the dark." She motioned back to Anakin, who, in turn, extracted a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He flicked his wrist, and the map unfolded. "Here, take a look," he offered, extending the hand with the map toward Obi-Wan. "Obi-Wan! Obi!" The Jedi stood up, scooped his improvised cloak pillow off the camping tarp, and walked over to Anakin. He took the map out of the scrapper's hands and held it out, examining the twists and turns of the mapped passages, pretending to understand what they represented. Tunnels. The paper provided close enough a view that individual passages and junctions were clear. But without a blinking "You are here" symbol, that wasn't much help. He'd been on Hat Abaddon a little more than a day, and he wasn't even sure which of the markets on the map he had stumbled into. Figuring out where he was now would be next to impossible. Anakin tossed the final bite of his ration bar into his mouth, stuffed the wrapper into a jacket pocket, and walked around behind Obi-Wan. "Here, let me help you," he mumbled, looking over the Jedi's shoulder. The scrapper reached out with a metal finger and poked a large room on the map. "Jira Grotto Bazaar, right?" he said, speaking up a bit more. "That's where we started this whole mess." Obi-Wan nodded appreciatively. He crouched down and set the map on the floor, tracing the route of their speeder chase with his finger.
"This here's the mining junction you meant to go down?"
he asked, pointing to a forking passage on the map. Yeah, Anakin nodded, and Obi-Wan's heart sank. The right side of the fork, it seemed, looked like it connected back to another grotto with residential units. But the left side of the fork was outlined with some dotted lines and the word unmapped.
"Terrific,"
Obi-Wan grumbled. An entire section of the map was just shaded light gray. According to the legend in the bottom corner, it was unknown territory, and they were anywhere in the middle of it. It's not as bad as it seems. We can still take a guess. Metal finger extended, he continued to trace along the map where Obi-Wan had left off. The digits snaked along the paper, mimicking the route of their swoop bike chase. Okay, far as I can recall, we crashed here and started walking here, and then, yeah, so like here, I think.
"You think?"
Obi-Wan asked. As he shot an incredulous look to Anakin, he unwrapped his ration bar and took a hefty bite. "He'd know better than you would," Padme said. She'd finished packing up the campsite and was pacing back and forth behind them. "We've been stuck here a month. Learned the way around pretty quick." Obi-Wan held his hands up in surrender and turned back toward the map. Okay, so where are we now?" "Right here, I think." Anakin pointed to a room that was, actually, to Obi-Wan's surprise, on the map. But the Jedi pointed at it. It only had one entrance. One way in or out. Anakin shook his head and hastily refuted it. "I don't think the cartographer drones expected anyone to be coming in through the river, man. This is the right room, which means our way back to the camp would be out through that door." The pilot gestured to an opening on the far side of the cavern, barely large enough to squeeze through. Obi-Wan glanced down at the map and traced the passage that led out from their glowing cavern. It twisted, bent, turned, but contained no branching paths. One long cave terminated at a massive circular room.
"That's the refugee camp."
"No, the camp's like half a day's walk past that," Padme said. "But at least we got a clear route back. And the big room could be a settlement by now. This map's a few years old. Could be a storage room. It could be a dump. I don't know. The big caverns get used for lots of things. But hopefully it's a decent place for us to camp. It'll take most of the day to get us there."
"Better get started, then,"
Obi-Wan muttered. He stood, folded up the map, and handed it back to Anakin. "Good. Something we can agree on," Padme said. She picked her knapsack up off the floor, swung it over her shoulders, and began walking toward the exit. Anakin and Obi-Wan followed close behind. Section. As the trio ventured further down the cave, the two men lagged behind Padme, swapping adventure stories, occasionally stopping in their tracks when said stories got interesting. Anakin shared a tale of a swoop race that nearly got him killed. Obi-Wan recounted his harrowing descent to Hat Abaddon, and then told of how the bridge shields barely kept him from cooking alive during re-entry. Anakin whistled, impressed. "Fuck your high score. I gotta find a cruiser to crash." Were it any other man, Obi-Wan would have laughed, but it wasn't out of the question. This one meant it.
"Well, it wasn't really piloting on my part."
Falling in style, they rounded a corner, and Anakin switched off the makeshift flashlight that had once again become necessary a few miles ago. Padme was standing in the midst of the cave with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. This new section of cavern was bathed in the bioluminescence of the mysterious lichen. Obi-Wan recoiled and moved away from the wall. "What's the matter, Kenobi?" Padme asked. It's clear by her tone that she's not actually concerned.
I had a bad experience with that stuff." He gestured hesitantly toward the cavern wall. "I'd rather not go through it again."
"Oh, explains why you told me not to touch it," Anakin said. He flexed his mechanical arm and stared at the metal fist. Approaching the cave wall, the scrapper stood near a section of the lichen that wasn't glowing and ran his fingers across it. Obi-Wan winced, but nothing happened to the young man. But the lichen, following Anakin's fingertips, began to glow blue, as though his hand were a ship leaking hypermatter. Everywhere the man brushed his hand, the lichen glowed. See? Anakin said. It's harmless. When I touched it, I passed out and woke up in a cold sweat. On my back. Why didn't you? You touched the glowing part, I guess. Well, yes. What'd you see? Padme asked. Her stance remained hostile, but her voice carried genuine interest. I couldn't make sense of it. Voices, flashes of light. Sounds about right, Anakin interrupted. It's some sort of a bizarre defense mechanism. Touch a part that isn't glowing, starts glowing. Touch a part that's glowing, you see crazy stuff. Memories, they say, Padme continued. There's a weird local religion that makes a whole thing out of it. Venturing deep into the caves to experience the thoughts of past civilizations, or something. I never got it. It just gives me a headache. Never ended up on the floor, though. Must have gotten a pretty traumatized bit of fungus. Yeah, the crawlers don't like it much either, apparently, Anakin said. Guess what passes for their brains isn't capable of handling sentient memories. Probably why there aren't any around. Well, I'll take that at least, said Obi-Wan. He wondered what it would be like to touch lichen that he had picked up a crawler's to touch lichen that had picked up a crawler's memories, and he shuddered. The conversation lulled into nothingness, and Padme removed the knapsack from her back. Excuse me. Opening it, she extracted a trio of ration bars and a pair of canteens. She tossed a canteen and one of the bars to Obi-Wan. So, Kenobi, she said, unscrewing the lid of her own canteen. Was there a backup plan? Just in case somehow you managed to screw up? She took a swig. Obi-Wan hesitated, trying to think of an answer. It really wouldn't do to loop the couple in on the unsanctioned nature of the mission. Classified didn't even begin to describe it. God, 2 people in the entire galaxy had known about this mission. One was the Chancellor. He'd even had to keep the coelacanth crew in the dark. With the Defense Committee locked in a state of indecision, Chancellor Organa's entire plan hinged on just one man. In any other situation, Obi-Wan could have pulled it off. By the way, this is why you can't have a government run by the legislature. I've been saying it for 10 damn... Obi-Wan could have pulled it off. He just hadn't foreseen the clones being so loyal to the cause that they'd shoot their own captain, but not allow him to surrender. No backup was coming. There would be no second wave. His chancellor, his friend, probably assumed he was dead. And if he guessed otherwise, he would not be rushing in to send a rescue squad. And within a few days, the Confederates would storm the tunnels of Had Abaddon and seize the planet's supply of fluid. Is the Republic sending reinforcements? He was ashamed to answer her question the way he did. But there was only one answer. No. Padme seemed taken aback. Her eyes widened. Well then. She silently unwrapped the ration bar and nibbled the corner of it. We got you and a lightsaber. I don't suppose you've got some super secret advanced Jedi comlink thing to call your weird wizard friends. Obi-Wan grinned ruefully and took a drink from his canteen before speaking. Sorry to disappoint, but I've got nothing of the sort. We're pretty stingy when it comes to handing out the fancy toys. He reached down and tapped the lightsaber hilt that was dangling from his belt. I even had to build this thing myself. Padme rolled her eyes, but Obi-Wan noticed a slight smirk creep across Anakin's face. The young man took a drink from the canteen the couple was sharing, and then screwed the lid back on and stuffed it into the knapsack. Padme reached her hand to take Obi-Wan's canteen. When the bag is packed, Padme slung it over her shoulder, and the trio continued their journey through the cavern. Section. There was something strange about Obi-Wan Kenobi. Okay. Duh. Anakin couldn't put his finger on it. It was almost as if a strange energy rolled off the man wherever he went. Growing up on Junkfort Station, he had heard the freighter pilots swap fantastical stories in the docking bays. As they loaded their ships, he would hide behind crates and eavesdrop on the tales they told. His favorites were the stories with incredible piloting. I mean, he would later come to realize they were largely exaggerations. But they were entertaining. And there were other stories too, though. You'd hear about a stroke of luck at a sabacc table. Or a chance encounter with a seductive alien at some bar. Or a harrowing escape from law enforcement. Or of a brush with greatness. Having seen a Jedi Knight. Anakin had never really believed those stories. Ever. Most of the kids who roamed the station didn't believe those stories. And the ones that did believe those stories were idiots. If there really were beings with magic powers fighting for justice, why weren't they coming by to clean up the station? But if there was any part of them that Anakin had really wanted to be true, it was the lightsabers. And today he'd seen one in action. Yet it wasn't the lightsaber he found himself pondering. It was the man who carried it. As they walked, Anakin had plenty of time to think over the previous day's events. He was becoming increasingly confident that he couldn't remember handing Obi-Wan his stun baton, and a stalactite just happening to impale a cave crawler. When he pointed at it, it seemed kind of good to be true. Not to mention 2 swoop pilots crashed into each other while his back was turned. That was lucky. He wanted to broach the subject, but for now, he pushed the thought out of his mind. It would be better done in the safety of the camp, probably, than in the middle of wandering through the caverns of doom. Anakin had been taking up the rear for the last several minutes. He jogged ahead to catch up with Obi-Wan. They weren't far now from the end of the passage. There was a small opening at the far wall, and Padme, in the lead, ducked her head through it. "Hey, Obi-Wan, shh!" He was quickly cut off by his panicked wife. Padme's back was pinned against the cave wall. She crouched next to the small opening at the end of the passage, eyes wide with shock. What? Anakin shot her a quizzical look. In response, she just gestured to the small hole. Anakin and Obi-Wan moved toward the wall and poked their heads through the hole. What they saw caused them both to nearly hurl themselves backward. They had arrived at the large cavern. It wasn't a settlement. It also wasn't a storage room. It wasn't a dump. For a solid minute, nobody could bring themselves to speak. Padme's hands shook as she removed her comlink from her pockets. What are we going to do? That's our only way through. Kenobi, I swear to the gods, shut up! The trio stared through the hole once again. The Jedi was right. This was their only way through. It was full of crawlers. Section.
Republic Archives. Cave Crawler. Legendary monstrosities referred to by the locals as cave crawlers prowl the darkest corners of Han Abaddon's cave networks. Local biologists speculate that they evolved on the planet's surface in a past age when the climate may have been more hospitable to organic life, fleeing to their current subterranean home when conditions above ground became intolerable. Averaging 2 meters in height and ranging from 2 to 5 meters in length, The crawlers are insectile, roaming the caverns on 8 limbs. Their eyes, which presumably had a function once upon a time, are now milky white and blind. They hunt via sound, the chittering made by their mandibles a form of echolocation. When miners came to had Abaddon in force, they drove the crawlers from most of the surface caverns. They now exist only in the lower depths. Those explorers foolhardy enough to explore these areas tend not to return.
God damn it. My piano's in a bad place for this. This is our final chapter. 18. Fallout.
Chancellor Organa. Chancellor Organa. Chancellor Organa. Chancellor Organa.
Bale opened his eyes.
Okay.
And immediately clamped them shut again. Sunlight streamed in through the window into his eyeball. The receptionist droid continued to natter at him from the front desk.
Chancellor Organa. Chancellor... What?
He barked and grimaced. His breath was sour.
Senator Mothma to see you, sir. She is rather insistent.
His gut tightened. What time is it?
12 standard time parts, Chancellor.
Oh, God. All right, send her in. He forced himself into a sitting position and blew a strand of hair from his forehead. How many appointments have I missed? Before the receptionist could reply, Mon came storming in. Mon, Bale said, trying to cut her off. What? With a crackle of feedback, a holographic news zine landed on his desk. The Chancellor didn't have to ask what the headline was going to say. But why not?
Rogue Chancellor escalates tensions in HAD system. Congress demands action.
Please tell me you didn't have anything to do with this. Her lower lip was drawn up tight, 2 pale spots atop her cheekbones. His silence, he supposed, was answer enough. You asked me to help contain this, to stick my neck out whipping votes. All I asked in return was that you'd keep your head down. Bale raised his hand in acknowledgement. Mon, it's gotten nearly impossible for you to come out of this still in office now. You must understand this. We'll be lucky if the public aren't calling for a second Rusan reformation. Bale? If you'd gotten out ahead of things, if you'd made some kind of a speech coming clean about all this, that would have been one thing. But this... She shook her head. The Chancellor shook his head, frustrated at his inability to explain this very well. Mon, I owe him. Suddenly he jabbed at the button on his desk comm. Has anyone else attempted to see me?
No, sir. Senator Mothma has been the only person to stop at your door in the last 12 hours.
Okay. And it wasn't enough, I guess. When he looked up, Mon Mothma was staring at him. Bale, do you mean to tell me that this leak was an attempt to bring the Jedi in? I needed a way to get their attention. On reflection, coming up with a way to do that when I was drunk and asleep was probably not smart. Chancellor, when I say this, I mean it seriously. It would have been less damaging if you had sent the fleet in. Rising, his legs aching in protest, Bale began to walk up and down the carpet. No, the fleet won't work. The Defense Committee would never agree to that. Technically, I could actually do it without them, but the optics would... That's not what I meant. Mercenaries are also a bad idea. I should never have brought that up last night. I'm sorry. I'm no better than the Confederacy if I'm hiring thugs to do my dirty... Bale? Maybe the Jedi did get their attention caught by it, by the way. Maybe someone's on their way now. But without talking to me first, they would just be walking into a death trap. I need to speak to them. I need to tell them where the end... Bale! He stopped walking. His colleague looked incredulous. Are you hearing yourself? Bale? While we sit here and dither over one man, you are squandering the only chance you have to do this right. If you're ousted as Chancellor, had Abaddon falls anyway. All its inhabitants, all its resources. Pray to the Confederacy. General Kenobi is a valuable asset, and he's your friend. I understand, he's your friend. But you were elected to this office to think of the people, not your friends. Once again, he was flooded with genuine shame, but this time it was different. This time he was in it. Well, at any rate, I can't afford to take half measures now. You're right. It was an idiotic decision, but I'm in it now. And if I follow through, and if I don't follow through with it, then I will have wasted your time and my office for nothing. Meaning? Meaning I intend to continue to go through with this. And while I understand that you probably despise me, I am asking as your Chancellor and your ally for your continued help. The silence that followed was thick with exasperation on one end and dread on the other. Finally, Bale's colleague gave a resigned sigh. Why are you so set on the Jedi being the ones to do this? Even if they have operatives in the Senate, which I doubt, why should they get involved on General Kenobi's behalf? Wasting members in the middle of an invasion doesn't seem like their style. Yeah. In that moment, Bale decided that he'd already plunged. Whatever. They're already involved. Her face was uncomprehending. What do you mean? The Chancellor gestured at the visitor's chair. Sit down, Mon Mothma. There's something you should know about General Kenobi. Section.
Republic Archives. The Rusan Reformation. Over 1,000 years ago, the Republic teetered on the brink of war. Nearly 50 star systems had declared desire to leave the Republic, and had made it clear they were willing to fight for their independence. The Senate was in disarray, and in the name of being able to act quickly in an emergency, the Supreme Chancellor was granted special executive wartime powers. Through a series of treaties, the secession conflicts were resolved without bloodshed. But the Chancellor refused to give up his powers, citing the possibility that tensions may resurface. Most saw this as harmless. He kept the executive powers in his back pocket, but never actually used them more than once. The one use was seen as an egregious breach of trust. Before his retirement, the Chancellor appointed his son to serve as his successor. This triggered a new wave of planets declaring independence from the Republic. They did not wish to live under the rule of what now seemed to be a monarchy. Fortunately, one senator acted swiftly in the face of this constitutional crisis. 1,152 years ago, on what is now celebrated as Reformation Day, Senator Teria Rusan and a coalition of colleagues stormed the offices of the Chancellor, held him at gunpoint, and demanded resignation. This entire coalition of senators served together as acting Chancellor until an election could be held. When the whole Senate gathered to vote for the new Chancellor, Rusan was unanimously selected. As her first act in office, she surrendered the emergency powers that had belonged to her predecessors. Today, Reformation is celebrated as a holiday, marking a birth of the Republic, and a rebirth of the Republic, and the first Reformation Day is the epoch of the current era in the Galactic Standard Calendar.